COVID emergency in China.
The people of China are stuck in a nightmare.
China's zero COVID approach seems to be backfiring badly,
which is only turning uglier and playing on repeat.
Public anger and rare street protests led to many rules being relaxed.
900 million Chinese have contracted the virus since 2020.
Hospitals are overflowing with coronavirus cases now that the country's abandoned its strict zero COVID policies.
Media calls this a pandemic tsunami.
Concerns are growing over a potential surge of cases in rural areas as people set out to travel for the Lunar New Year holidays.
Some health experts predict China could suffer up to 1 million COVID deaths in the next few months, and this outbreak could also threaten the global economy.
China is indeed in a weak spot.
What isn't China telling the world about what's really happening?
COVID is exploding in China again right now, and it came back with a vengeance. So brace yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, because here we go again.
The hospital is just overwhelmed from top to bottom. So, the ER filled up with people. A lot of them got admitted to the hospital. They're not getting better in a day or two, so there's no flow. So they're stuck in the ER.
And the Chinese government is working really hard to cover this up.
Beijing is facing its worst COVID outbreak after the government eased strict containment measures nearly 2 weeks ago. What's surprising is the government isn't reporting many deaths, yet at the same time, the death business seems to be surging.
Several shops selling funeral supplies. Some told me that business has gone up threefold and prices have doubled. Yet some say they're stuck with stock that they can't sell because people are not able to hold funerals.
Let me now read out what the WHO's emergencies director recently said. I'm quoting, "We believe that the current numbers being published from China underrepresent the true impact of the disease." Are you kidding me?
On December 20th, 2022, the Chinese government reported 3,049 COVID infections. But according to an insider government official, that number was actually closer to 37 million.
Beijing is not reporting China's true death toll from this latest wave.
All right, COVID zero, a distant memory in China as nearly 37 million people may have been infected in one day this week.
The Chinese government said that they have about fewer than 5,000 cases per day.
Although precise numbers are very difficult to come by, the official Chinese numbers don't look anywhere near as dire as what is generally being understood.
And establishing how big this outbreak isn't easy. Official statistics note 16 COVID deaths in the last month, but there's skepticism about these figures. Then, look at the far right of this chart. The number of confirmed cases is falling, but that's because mass testing in China stopped recently, which means no one's quite sure what's happening with the virus.
The Chinese people have been under brutal COVID lockdowns for more than 3 years now, but in late November 2022, they have finally had enough, and mass protests broke out. So by December 8th, President Xi Jinping actually gave in, and he actually dropped all the COVID restrictions. He had given the people exactly what they wanted: freedom, the opportunity to travel, no more lockdowns.
This morning, for the first time since the start of the pandemic, travelers are streaming into China, arriving, reuniting.
But unfortunately, President Xi didn't take one crucial thing into account.
China has, since it's been now well over a month, a substantial wave in a population that we know, generally speaking, was relatively under-vaccinated.
No one has natural immunity, but we also know that their domestically generated vaccines aren't great. And most of the countries that used them in order to get their kind of first batch then moved on to a Western model that worked better.
So they had a twofold problem. They did not have vaccines and they didn't develop natural immunity.
And now everyone's getting hit all at once with a virus that has at least 50% more communicability than the measles.
See, unlike the rest of the world, China's brutal lockdowns meant they were not given the chance to build their immunity.
看看走廊里全是病人，哎呀，看着挺纠结的，护士们都也挺累，病人实在是看着。
And instead of easing back on lockdowns gradually like other countries did, she opened the floodgates overnight.
The Chinese are about to embark on some 2 billion trips this Lunar New Year. Some, or possibly many of them, will be carrying the coronavirus with them. Remember, this is the event that sparked the first mass spreading of COVID-19 from Wuhan.
So now, unsurprisingly, COVID is going crazy again over there.
心情嘛，就是很焦急的呀，没办法的呀。但人也是很多，人家也是尽力的。不过，他们没有人呢，等了很久，有的医生都没空来回答你。
排队呀，来不及啊！今天都没有了，明天也不定有。
他没有办法确诊他就会发现，但他不测呀，所以就不算呀。
你放开之前，药厂紧急把退了药多生产一点。
The implementation of zero COVID and the abrupt and unprepared manner in which it was abandoned, speaks to a chronic governance failure. A lot of these local governments are highly indebted. They've got big cash flow problems. This is a big problem that the central government and local governments will have to sort out.
And new variants might be forming.
There are 7 different variants circulating in Beijing right now, or in China right now. 3 of them did not exist 2 or 3 months ago. And it takes about 6 months of data for you to get good information on the R0 and the lethality. So we just don't know. And then third, in part because of Xi, when you're a one-man state, all policy and all authority starts and stops with you. And unless you're providing very clear guidance on everything, which is impossible for one person to do for a whole country, especially one the size of China, the bureaucracy either goes into automatic or does nothing. Well, right now it's doing nothing. So the data decisions in China are not to gather data and figure out what we can do. It's to, instead of gathering data and lying about it, we're just not going to gather any data at all. So we're not going to know how bad these strains are until they get out of China and circulate in the rest of the world for 6 months. So the lowest fatality estimate that I have seen that I consider credible is that they're going to lose 1.5 million people just from COVID.
So stay dangerous, subscribe for more, and welcome to another episode of The Gift That Keeps On Giving, COVID.
This was done in a sort of convulsive political lurch. People were not prepared for it.
So many hospitals are completely under strain, medical staff under immense pressure, crematoriums are working overtime.
And now it looks like it's going to get even worse.
If you happen to run a business where you ship your products to your customers, you know how much of a headache it's been with China and all the supply chain issues. But you know what will make your life a lot easier? ShipStation. ShipStation is hands down the best way to ship if you're running an e-commerce business. With ShipStation, you'll be able to ship with confidence knowing that you're saving up to 88% off from top carriers like UPS, USPS, and DHL Express. It's no wonder why over 130,000 merchants use ShipStation and why 98% of companies that use ShipStation for a year end up using it for life. Here's how it works. Simply import your orders from almost every selling channel that you can think of, Shopify, Amazon, Etsy, and more. Then you can use their scan-based workflows, bulk updates, and automation processes to ship your orders super fast. While you're shipping faster than ever before, you're going to be accessing shipping discounts of up to 84%. You'll be able to compare rates from top carriers, and you'll be able to print labels individually or in batches. ShipStation will even instantly update the tracking information to the selling channel and the customer once the order ships. So go into the new year with totally stress-free, affordable shipping by going to shipstation.com/JTran for a 60-day free trial. That's 2 months of cheaper, simpler shipping completely for free. Go to shipstation.com/JTran with the link below right now. Thanks to ShipStation for sponsoring this video. January 23rd, 2020. Xi Jinping invokes his zero-COVID policy, a policy that over the next 3 years will destroy the spirit of the Chinese people.
To deal with the spread, China implemented a zero-COVID policy. Under zero COVID, no measure was too drastic to get official case counts to zero.
And when Xi said zero COVID, he literally meant zero. If you were in a store and a COVID case was detected, you would have to quarantine literally right then and there in the store and sleep there overnights. If you were on a flight and a passenger tested positive for COVID, you might get sent to a quarantine camp upon landing. If you went to a protest that the government wanted to shut down, they could simply turn your health codes red and send you home. Once you got back home, you would be locked in by the order of the government. They might even weld your door shut. There was literally no way out, no escaping it. And after 3 long years of this, the Chinese people finally pulled down their masks and fought back. They demanded that this insane zero COVID policy be dropped. And after weeks of raising hell, the Chinese government did actually seem to listen to the masses, and Xi Jinping did actually drop the restrictions.
We start with an update. China is scrapping some of its most controversial COVID rules, moving away from their strict zero COVID policy.
A lot of that was probably because the protest did actually threaten China's bottom line, especially with the protest at the iPhone factory in China. Watch our video on that by clicking the card on the top right corner of the screen. So for a brief moment, the Chinese people thought they had actually won. They thought that this was really the end, when in reality, things were about to get much, much worse. COVID cases are skyrocketing.
Quite possible that there'll be 1 million deaths or more this winter from COVID in China.
Emergency rooms are packed. Funeral homes are overflooded.
Incredibly sensitive and harrowing time for many of these people. Some of them have lost loved ones and are unable to find spaces in the crematoriums.
And those who can't even get a spot at the crematorium are resorting to using their own backyards. And the Chinese government has been trying their best to cover this up, to keep the masses from panicking. But then a bunch of Chinese celebrities, from entrepreneurs to academics to opera singers, all started dying from COVID. So now the masses are starting to learn the truth. See, when you lock up the largest population in the world for 3 years, and then suddenly let them out of their cages, they will get sick. It's like a kid catching chickenpox for the first time.
There is an extremely rapid rise of COVID-19 cases in China. The infections are primarily being fueled by the Omicron variants. Now here's what has experts concerned, right? Every new infection in China provides an opportunity for the coronavirus to change. There's limited immunity amongst China's large population of 1.4 billion. And even though vaccination rates overall are high, the number of folks getting booster shots is much lower, especially amongst the elderly. Also, China's vaccines have proven to be less effective against severe infection than our messenger RNA versions here in the US. Plus, most vaccines were given more than a year ago, so the effectiveness has decreased. All of this, creates the perfect scenario for the virus to change.
The more a virus spreads, the more likely it will produce a new variant.
Yes, we do see when the virus spreads to lots more people that you get more variants, because the more it reproduces, the higher the chance of a mutation or a recombination event. And that's actually what's really concerning about China.
China is now an incubator, and 1.4 billion people with low immunity is the perfect storm. So what about the rest of the world? While China stayed inside and weakened their immune system, we made ours stronger. With some caveats. mRNA vaccines only last for 6 months, according to Yale Medicine. Natural immunity only lasts 1 year. And governments have gotten real comfortable with lockdowns. And now that China might be brewing a new variant, the world is blocking them out.
Countries like Italy, Spain, France have said that they'll perhaps have some form of testing, perhaps proof of a negative COVID test before arrival or proof of vaccination.
Countries are putting up travel restrictions on Chinese citizens. The US, Canada, India, Australia, France, and the UK are all demanding negative tests at their borders. Morocco and South Korea have banned Chinese travelers altogether. And the reason why all these countries are putting up their barricades is because Xi Jinping is not sharing any information. Go to the website of China's National Health Commission and you will see a list of daily COVID case reports, dating all the way back to February 2020. Daily reports that they just randomly stopped doing on December 24th, 2022, right when things were getting out of hand again. Wow, how convenient, right?
Raise your hand if that sounds fishy.
So what is the Chinese government trying to hide right now? Are they trying to hide how 90%, I repeat 90% of China's third largest province has been infected with COVID? Or how 18% of China's population got infected during the month of December alone? Whatever the Chinese government is trying to hide, it is not working. A lot of countries are still closing their borders with China, but not all of them. See, some countries are too poor, too corrupt, too dependent on Chinese tourism to close their borders with China. Some countries are happy that China finally opened up their borders. They don't care about the welfare of their population, so in those countries, COVID will spread faster than others. All we can do is hope that things won't leak to the rest of the world again. One of the things the West has been trying to force China and other countries like India to do is to get them to stop using coal. Why? Because coal contributes to climate change too much. What do you want to do, leave a barren wasteland for our children's children to inherit? Have a heart. The problem is countries like China and India run on coal. They can't afford to switch over to renewable energy. Stopping the use of coal would grind their economies to a halt and make them powerless. On top of that, rich Western countries would have never gotten so rich and powerful if it wasn't for them using coal, if it wasn't for them spewing out a ton of emissions. And yet the West is trying to do everything in their power to not let China and India get rich in the same manner as they did. And the West isn't willing to pay for it either.
The United States, 4-5% of the world's population, still uses 25% of the world's resources. You outsource production to China and then you say China is the carbon polluter. China's producing your buckets. China's producing your nuts and bolts. China's producing your phones. Try to produce it in your own countries and see your carbon emissions rise. You love lecturing us because you have a colonial mentality. Then there are colonial structures and institutions. You lend us money, and every time you lend us money, which is our money, every time the International Monetary Fund comes to our societies and they tell us, here's the money we are giving you. No, it's our money. You give us our money back as debt, and then you lecture us about how we should live. It's extraordinary. It's not just a colonial mentality. It's the colonial structures and institutions which reproduce themselves year after year after year. And let me tell you something, the climate justice movement not clued enough on this. The climate justice movement is a movement that says we're worried about our future. What future? What future? Children in the African continent, in Asia, in Latin America, they don't have a future, they don't have a present. They're not worried about the future, they're worried about their present. Your slogan is, we're worried about the future. What future? That's a middle-class bourgeois Western slogan. You got to be worried about now. 2.7 billion people can't eat now, and you're telling people reduce your consumption. How does this sound to a child who hasn't eaten in days?
It's almost like the West uses climate change as a way to keep poor countries poor, to keep the slaves slaves. Now, we're not saying climate change isn't real or anything. As per the YouTube community guidelines, we're just saying that climate change is an awfully convenient excuse to keep poor countries poor. Wouldn't you say so? And we break it all down in our latest private documentary on climate change. Watch it right now by clicking the card on the screen.